courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast. This is episode 476. I am Andrew in our forum, and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. Joining me as always, my co-host Derek. He is D3 in our forum, and also on Twitter at D3G and D384. Derek, great to be talking to you as always. Got a fun one this week.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about what video games we wished we could visit again for the first time. And then we're also going to be getting to your responses on that subject as well. However, we're going to start the show off by talking about a video game that you had never played before until tonight. And that is NBA Inside Drive 2004. So Andrew never visited this game before. So visiting it for the first time in 2023, we connected on Parsec. I hosted. We used the Bulls versus the Celtics, and we played a half of basketball, and it was really fun.
Most appropriate that we talk about a game that I'm visiting for the first time, given our main topic this week. Yet, what a fantastic game. I didn't have an Xbox back in the day. I was on PlayStation 2, so obviously couldn't play the Inside Drive series. I have played Inside Drive 2000, which is on PC, and of course the precursor NBA Full Court Press that has Kevin Calabro in it. Both of those have Kevin Calabro, as does the other Inside Drive games. So much character to that game. I mean, first of all, the gameplay, so much fun. The big, loud dunks, which you and I both love. The bit of the loose balls on rebounds and batting the ball around. You don't see that in a lot of games, not even 2K23 that much, really. And just the commentary is fantastic. The atmosphere, I was laughing at some of it because there's a lot of character in that game. The PA announcer, hot dogs, get your hot dogs here, and the crowd chatter, and there was one lone person who was not happy in the first quarter, just boo for something that happened from the home crowd. But just so much fun, so smooth. And we were talking about it before we started recording, and as you said, a damn shame that series ended, because there was a lot of good stuff from the gameplay and the presentation in that game. Just a great NBA game for the time, and it's up there with Live and 2K.
Oh, it was absolutely competing with them at the time. And can you imagine what an Inside Drive game would look like in 2023? I mean, if the gameplay was that good and that solid back then, and they were doing so many things right with the presentation and the sim aspect, which some are good, some good aspects to the sim engine, and some weird ones, which we'll get into. But I can't imagine how great that series could be today if they just kept building on what they had in NBA Inside Drive 2002, 2003, and 2004, because all three of those games are great. But yeah, the game just has a ton of character, and it screams NBA action. I love the funny PA announcer comments where they're talking about it. It's like during a timeout or during a stoppage of play, they're talking about how somebody needs to move their car because they're going to get a ticket and stuff like that. Like, it just adds a lot of character and fun to the game. Like you said, the loud dunks are fantastic. The game has a really good post game with fadeaways and hook shots, even though one of my hook shots with Tyson Chandler went over the backboard, which was pretty funny in itself.
Well, for young Chandler, that's probably not too inaccurate, really.
Right, exactly. He was still kind of
raw,
maturing. Yeah, he was very raw at that time. He really put it together later in his career, especially with the Mavericks and the Knicks and whatnot. I mean, he won a title as the starting center with the Mavericks.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it has good crossover dribbles and good spin moves. I had a really nice spin move with Jalen Rose into a two-handed jam. There's just so many positive aspects to the gameplay. I think you would agree. Like, you grab a rebound and you outlet the ball, and the outlet looks so realistic, whether they're throwing it with two hands or with one hand. And the receiver, it continues to move with the ball, so he doesn't stop to catch it. And he's able to go in motion to the hoop and throw it down. You and I had a great play where I grabbed a rebound with legend Marcus Fizer, threw a one-handed outlet pass to you with Eddie Robinson, and who's another legend, obviously. And he threw down a loud jam. Great steal mechanics, great block mechanics, good shooting mechanics. Like, the game it's just a really solid basketball game.
And of course, the player animations and interactions as well. You look at Live 2004, which I hold in very high regard. It brought in the 10-man freestyle that year, which really revolutionized the player interactions and physicality. But 2004, if you look back at that, there's that hunched over dribbling animation, there's the big feet, there's some of the weird animations in that game. Even at the time, we noticed these issues. Inside Drive has some very impressive body animations on the players.
I find that NBA Live 2004 can have more frustrating moments because of all the suction that's in that game.
Two-man animations, yeah.
There's a ton of two-man animations in NBA Live 2004 where you get put in them and you're forced to pass or you're going to lose the ball no matter what. And then if you try to put up a shot, you put up this awkward one-handed shot towards the hoop that has probably a 5% chance of going in. But on NBA Inside Drive 2004, there's less of those two-man animations. I mean, there are a few, like when you're backing in and you can actually feel your defender on you and you can spin off left or right and whatnot. But overall, gameplay can be less stressful and less annoying at times on Inside Drive. Not saying that I don't love NBA Live 2004, and NBA Live 2004 has the ultimate advantage over Inside Drive, and that's that right stick dribbling and right stick triple threat, right? But at the end of the day, I can pick up Inside Drive 2002 through 2004 and often even get more enjoyment out of it than those early 2000s NBA Lives.
Well, there's a great pace as well. I mean, it's not exactly era appropriate, but a lot of games around that time didn't really nail that. I mean, I guess we all wanted the pace to be a bit quicker at the time. As much as you and I love some of those defensive battles of the era, a lot of the video games did have a bit more scoring than, at least without slider adjustments, than we'd see in real life at the time, based on that style, that grit and grind kind of style that they had at the time. But yeah, it's just a really fun pace for that game. Again, just love those dunks, the variety of animations. Yeah, they were really doing some great things with that series. And again, it just shows why competition is so important in the space, why alternatives are so important in the space, because we have one game now, and look, it's all things considered, the right game probably emerged with the Monopoly, with 2K having that consistent quality over the years. But it's a damn shame not having Live. It's a damn shame not having Inside Drive or Sony's NBA series, even if they weren't on par with Live or 2K. Having those alternatives and something different, something fun, something else to put on was so important, which is why we love dipping into our collections, Derek.
Yeah, exactly. I also want to point out, how interesting are those Bulls and Celtics teams?
I was going to say, yeah.
The Bulls, I mean, it brought back so many memories, with the Bulls with, Kirk Heinrich, Captain Kirk, and, Jamal Crawford and video game legend, incredibly jacked Marcus Fizer, who's way better in video games than he is in real life. You had the Eddie Curry, Tyson Chandler debacle in Chicago, those two on the same team. You still have Scottie Pippen, his return to Chicago, which was super awkward and weird. And he's on that team. You have Jalen Rose, fun video game team, actually.
Yes. But
obviously not great in real life. And then that Celtics team, it's a weird transition. They made the conference finals in 01, 02. And then all of a sudden they hit some rough patches in mediocrity. And they ended up with that Vin Baker on that team. We still have Walter McCarty there. That was his last season with the Celtics before he ended up going over to Phoenix, and then he ended his career, I believe, with the Clippers. Then they have Marcus Banks, Paul Pierce, Antoine Walker, Tony Batiste. It's a very strange Celtics team that has some new pieces that that weren't there in that 2002 run. But yeah, I mean, I love revisiting early 2000s and mid 2000s basketball video games because I know the league like the back of my hand because I was obsessed with the NBA, right? During that time. So every time I put on games like NBA Inside Drive 2004 and whatnot and go through the rosters and put those teams on the floor, it puts a smile on my face because I'm just this is awesome. I know all of these guys.
I'm the same way. And look, how many times in Wayback Wednesday or here on the podcast have I used the words interactive almanacs? That's what basketball video games are. when you go back to these older titles and you see those players that you remember from back in the day, watching on TV, playing within games, collecting basketball cards of. I mean, I've actually just drafted a Way Back Wednesday about Live 99 for Nintendo 64 and updating the rosters in that game. Can you update the rosters for the 99 season? And just going through those rosters and seeing those old players. Yeah, those late 90s, early 2000s games, there's so much nostalgia for the players in that era and the teams of that time. And that Bulls team, like you say, it's very weird. You've got the young guns, you've got Eddie Curry and Tyson Chandler, Kirk Heinrich, Jamal Crawford, so you've got these promising young players. Then you've got these veterans like a washed-up Scottie Pippen, pretty much, unfortunately, a Kendall Gill, a Donyell Marshall, Jalen Rose is in there, he's still pretty good at that time. So it's this weird mishmash of veterans past their prime and capable veterans and promising young players, and it didn't really come together. And Jay Williams, of course, is on that roster but inactive because of his a motorcycle accident that did end his career ultimately. So you've got him on the bench as well if you want to bring him on the virtual hardwood. So a very interesting team. Didn't do much in real life. They were another year away from getting Ben Gordon and Luol Deng and starting to come back with the proper baby Bulls that had a bit of a good run there in the mid to late 2000s. But yeah, it's of the early 2000s Bulls, definitely one of the most interesting teams. And yeah, having Pippen back for that last kind of farewell tour was interesting, to say the least.
Yeah, I want to go back to what you said about the interactive almanac. I think what needs to be understood as well is that back then in the 90s and early 2000s, sometimes the first we were hearing of some of these players or seeing what they look like and all of that stuff was in video games.
Sure.
Before we saw them in real life. And then when we would see them in real life, we would be like, hey, I used that guy in the video game, right? And it makes you pay closer attention and it makes you want to learn more about them, how they play on the real life hardwood. So sometimes the video game experience with these players, learning about these players, came first. And I think that's really cool because, guys that weren't part of your local broadcasts, like for me, we watched the Boston Celtics and we tried to never miss a game, right? But you weren't seeing, the Clippers for 82 games, right?
Exactly.
And so you are going to use somebody like Eric Piatowski, when he was with the Clippers. You're going to use somebody like Eric Piatowski more in a video game than you're even going to see him in real life. Just same thing when I talk about video game legend, Hashim Thabit or Calvin Booth, etc. We're using them more in video games and seeing them more in video games than we are even in real life. So I always thought that was a cool aspect of basketball gaming.
Oh, definitely. And speaking of Piatkowski, was a hero of mine, a virtual hardwood legend for me in my Live 06 dynasty with the Bulls. Had a big fourth quarter to give us the win, so had to give him the start the next game as a reward for that. So he's actually quite memorable to me for that reason. And yeah,
well, he could flat out shoot.
Oh,
I mean, he could shoot.
He could shoot, yeah. And here's the thing, is that living in Australia, I might get to see 1 or 2 games a week. Just the game of the week they had on, and that was whatever they selected for to give it. Maybe usually it was the NBA on NBC or the NBA on TNT game of the week. Maybe it was a local broadcast. Sometimes, if it was the All-Star game, it'd be the All-Star game, obviously. So I didn't have pay TV back then, so I didn't have the same access as now. So yes, I'd see a lot of those players through NBA Action. That's why I loved NBA Action so much, because that'd keep me up to date. Pre-internet as it is now, NBA Action was such a valuable resource for news, not to mention the highlights, obviously, and the great commentary of Jim Fagan as the voiceover talent on that show. But yeah, you didn't have that access, especially overseas, as I obviously am. So video games is where you got to see a lot of those players and experience them for the first time and play with them. Absolutely.
Speaking of for the first time, I got to bring this up as well. One really cool thing happened when Andrew and I were playing NBA Inside Drive 2004, and this is the mark of a good video game with good gameplay. Andrew had never played this game before, so he didn't know how to post up. He didn't know what the post up button was. So I messaged him on Twitter. I think it was, the start of the second quarter.
Yeah.
And I said, Andrew, in order to initiate like a post up, like to go into a post up position, you got to push the back left trigger. So the next play, I get the ball to Andrew in the post. He pushes the back trigger and he spins into the middle of the lane and flushes it.
Was that with Pfizer?
Two-handed dunk with Marcus Pfizer.
Yes.
And the fact that you were able to execute that and it looks so smooth and great on your first ever attempt on a post-up shows you how pick up and play this game really is. And that was just absolutely excellent. I also wanted to point out a couple more things about NBA Inside Drive 2004. One, season mode is awesome because you can use every team if you want. You can use 5 teams. You can use 1 team. You can use 20 teams. You can use every team. You can use any amount of teams you want. It's awesome. You have the fantasy draft option, etc. The sim engine is a little off. You could say teams were averaging, in our sim situation where I simmed 2 months of the season, teams were averaging in like the 120s and 130s and whatnot. Sean Marion was second in the league in scoring, averaging like 36 points per game. That's a little weird. Iverson was leading the league in scoring with 38 a game. Kobe was averaging 12 assists a game. So the sim engine isn't exactly awesome or realistic in that game, but it's still, it's still okay. Like, it's all right. The create a player feature in that game is very limited. There's only like 5 different face types that you can choose, or 5 different player types in general. But there is a create a player feature. There's a practice option, etc. But I was really impressed with the fact in that game that you can control as many teams as you want. There is excellent stat tracking. There is excellent presentation to it, etc. But yeah, that sim engine was a little off.
It was, and those are the details that Live and 2K have often gotten a bit more accurate than other games. Fox Sports Basketball 2000 is another game I'll throw out there that's got a very weird sim engine as far as the league leaders. I think when I've simmed a few seasons, or simmed through a season, Jason Williams was leading the league with about 30 points per game. Great, we love Jason Williams, obviously, you and I, but more known for his passing than his high volume scoring. Although he did have some big scoring games, but certainly not to lead the league. But you do have
he had great handles too. We got to give him that credit for that.
Absolutely,
so passing and great handles. Yeah.
Indeed, that's what he's known for more so than scoring the ball. But anyway, I mean, there is that issue with the sim engine, but very solid game, top to bottom, detailed game, deep game for the time. Could definitely sink hours into that. Would not be against playing that again, obviously. Love to play these games multiple times and getting a taste for it. Definitely keen for more. But one final point about Pfizer, obviously known as a bust for the Bulls from that time. But whenever I play with him in games, because he was such a bust in real life, it's kind of like a personal joke with me. It's kind of like an in-joke to dominate with him in games and play better than his ratings or real-life performance would suggest. It's kind of fun for me to dump it down to Pfizer and dunk like that.
We do that all the time, my brothers and I, especially my oldest brother, Mark, is he will search for busts or guys that, ride the end of the bench. I'm going to give you an example. Robert Swift. You remember him?
Oh, yes.
Robert Swift for the Seattle Supersonics. Mark would always try to get Robert Swift in the draft so he could overachieve with him. And trust me when I tell you, 2K was never known for getting big men right. You can go back to their games all the way back to the original NBA 2K. Big men are often just too dominant. You can take the worst big man on a team oftentimes, and if you use him enough, you can get an efficient 20 and 10 or even more, no matter what. So he would always take Robert Swift. He would take guys like I've mentioned before, like Calvin Booth. Another guy, like I've talked about many times, Hashim Thabit. Larry Sanders, who wasn't known for scoring, was always incredibly dominant in NBA 2K around the rim, so you could just score with him a lot. I definitely understand the thing with Marcus Pfizer. And he was a video game legend for us as well. He was built in real life more like a football player or like a pro wrestler. And also in NBA Live games as well. So NBA Live, that's why my brother would always double up big guys. Because the NBA Live series often you could dominate with big men too much as well, and way overachieve with them. So, Pfizer was a legend in our house as well.
I mean, that's what Virtual Hardwood Legends are all about, right? Taking these players and having fun with them. I mean, it doesn't always have to be super serious. I do consider myself a sim gamer, but just having some fun on the virtual hardwood and scoring a lot with a player who shouldn't or wouldn't normally score that much, and turning these busts into legends, as well as putting up huge performances with actual NBA legends, of course. But Inside Drive 2004, definitely want to play it again. Wish I played it more back in the day.
Yeah, I have a question about that actually. So let's say you did have an Xbox and you had both NBA Live 2004 and Inside Drive 2004. Do you think you would have split time maybe between those two?
It's possible. I think I got more into Dynasty. I really got into Dynasty in Live 2004, so I think some of the depth of that mode might have drawn me in a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense because Live 2004 also had the Legends
Yes.
as well. It just had overall a little bit more depth, but at the same time, gameplay is paramount. And I think that, I would guarantee that you would spend at least a little time on Inside Drive 2004.
I think so. I mean, I did branch out from Live from time to time, so I definitely would have given it a go. Love the commentary, obviously. Although Live 2004 did bring in Marv Albert and the Tsar, Mike Fratello, so yeah, they certainly did a good job of commentary that year as well. But no, I think I would definitely spend some time with it. I think the right stick dribbling of Live 2004 definitely gave it an advantage, as Live had for many years with its dribbling controls, so that might have also pushed me over the edge towards 2004. But yeah, if I had an Xbox, I would definitely be checking out the Inside Drive series back in the day. And I don't know, maybe I will get my hands on an original Xbox at some point. I do have Inside Drive 2002 in my collection because that was supposed to be backwards compatible with my 360, but I've never been able to get it to work. So we'll see.
Yeah, I have actually booted it up on my 360 before, and it doesn't work as well as it does on, the original Xbox.
Yeah.
It's incredibly choppy. It doesn't look as good, etc. Like there's a frame rate issue with it. It's not a good port to the 360. So luckily, I can get NBA Inside Drive 2003 to work on the emulator, and NBA Inside Drive 2004, which we played tonight, doesn't work great on the emulator, but it's functional, and we were still able to have a good time. And I do have the original Xbox hooked up to my TV, so if I do want to play like Inside Drive 2002 or whatnot, or 2003, 2004 on the original hardware, I can do that and record that action that way.
Unfortunately, can't use the companion app with that one.
Yeah, I wish it was compatible with the original Xbox, but you know what? We work with what we got.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, me-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community. So Derek, I actually put out the prompt this week. Which basketball video game do you wish you could play again for the first time? And this is a topic that's been on my mind for a while, actually. Ever since I read an article, or it might have been a video, actually. I saw it somewhere, talking about games you wish you could play again for the first time, and it caught my eye because it was talking about Fallout 3, actually, and playing it without knowing where everything is, and the character builds and so forth. And also, if you've played Fallout 3, you know when you exit Vault 101 for the first time, and the light hits you, the sunlight hits you for the first time, and it just blinds you, and then as your vision clears, you just see this wasteland in front of you for the first time. And it's a really special experience in gaming to see that, and really just sets up the atmosphere of the whole game. And of course, that goes for basketball games as well. The first time we played some of these classic games, just seeing everything they had to offer, diving into a franchise mode for the first time, seeing the legends, getting on the court and seeing all the new gameplay elements. There's definitely games that I wish, Derek, I could play again for the first time, just to experience that rush once again.
So I might have a different thought process on this, or you might agree. Certain genres age better. So, for example, like for this scenario. So, like adventure games, MMORPGs, RPGs in general, fighting games, etc. I feel like the mechanics in those, like for example, I'm going to bring up a game like Final Fantasy VII, which is my brother Nick's like one of his favorite games of all time. And we've talked about this. He sometimes he wishes that he could, experience that again for the first time. Final Fantasy VII has gameplay, a story, a presentation that would get him super excited right now, right? Like it ages so well. Like the character development in that game, getting to know the characters, the fighting system, how the depth of that, all of that. I think it's a little different when we're talking about basketball video games, because it's not like revisiting a Devil May Cry or a Fallout or Zelda or maybe an old racing game, even like a Mario Kart or an RC Pro-Am or like a fighting game like Mortal Kombat. Like it's not the same, because if I play Double Dribble for the first time in 2023, I might be like, all right, yeah, this is cool, but it's not even going to get close to the same rush that I had when I first picked it up, right? Same thing with a game like NBA Showdown or Bulls versus Blazers. Like I would be like, I really want to get this game. I'm going to get this game in my library and I'm going to put it on, and I'm not going to have that same rush for those games. However, there are certain games where if I visited them for the first time in 2023, I would be blown away and I would have the same rush as I did back then easily. And I'm going to bring one up and then I'm going to throw it over to you. NBA Street Volume 2. If I put that on for the first time tonight and I had never played it before, I would absolutely be obsessed with the art style, with the gameplay, with the gameplay solo, with it co-op, with it against. I would be obsessed with the, beating every NBA team, doing the unlockables, all of that stuff. I would absolutely love to visit NBA Street Volume 2 again for the first time, because that game would really hold up in my mind today, like as an all-around game. In fact, I talked about it on a previous podcast. My brother Nick and I last year beat all the NBA teams together again on NBA Street Volume 2, because we hadn't visited it together in years, and just picking it up again, it's like this game is unbelievable. So for you, what is your NBA Street Volume 2?
I mean, NBA Street Volume 2 would probably be a great example of that. A game that I just covered in Way Back Wednesday, obviously, NBA Jam on Fire Edition. If I played that today, I would say this is a game that is can hold its own against any contemporary basketball game. So I think that would be an example for me. That's an interesting take on it that you had, the idea of visiting a game for the first time now and having it have that same impression. I was thinking more of, for me, going back in time and being able to experience it again for that first time and get that same rush and that first kind of experience it for the first time like that. But that's a very interesting way of looking at it, because that definitely changes the answer. Because looking at some of the games I have on my list here, I will single it down to... we'll try to single it down to at least one pick before we get to the end of the segment. But the games that came to mind for me, NBA Jam Tournament Edition, NBA Live 95 for Super Nintendo, NBA Live 96 PC, NBA Live 2000, NBA Live 2004, NBA Live 06, and NBA 2K13. Those were the games that just captured my imagination from the moment I played them, basically, and just would love to be able to go back in time and play them for the first time and get that same rush again. So those are the kinds of games I was looking at. But some of those games, some of those choices will change if we're looking at it from your perspective. It does come down to more like maybe a 2K17 or a Street Volume 2 or a Jam on Fire Edition. So yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, so I'd be interested in what our listeners think of that spin on the question that we asked the community, because games like NBA Street Volume 2, NBA Jam on Fire Edition, NBA 2K13, right? NBA 2K11, NBA Live 2004. There's a lot of games that if let's say they became available on Steam, or, you could just get them on PC in general and play, or on a console or whatever, and I picked them up for the first time now, even if the graphics seemed outdated. Remember, for me and my brothers, what is it all about? Fun, right? It's about that gameplay. All those titles that I just mentioned, even if I was playing them for the first time in 2023, I would be like, this needs to be part of a rotation, right? Like, we would be like, wow, this art is cool. Hey, look at this cyberface. Hey, look at the things we can do with the right stick. Look at the different options in this game and all of that. So the way I'm looking at it is Yeah, there are still a lot of games from the past that if I was experiencing them for the first time in 2023, that I would love them and want to spend a lot of time on them. But yeah, going back to, your intent on, related to that question, I would say I would love to once again experience Jordan versus Bird for the first time. That game just blew us away. We couldn't believe that we were able to play the 3-point contest like we saw it on TV. Couldn't believe we were able to throw it down with Michael Jordan, who was the talk of everybody's household, at the time. Being able to play one-on-one, it was just a different take on basketball that we hadn't seen in video games because we had only played double dribble at that point. So we spent a lot of time on that. I'd also say NBA Live 96, because when we found out that there were hidden legends in the game, we went nuts. We spent just so much time on that title. I'll say probably NBA Fast Break 98 as well, because that was our introduction. We're going to call it to the 2K series because Visual Concepts was involved in the creation of that game. We got that game for Christmas, and we just couldn't even believe the graphics at the time. We thought the gameplay was so advanced. We played so many exhibition games on that, probably the most I've ever played in video game history on that game, because you know how we love seasons and stat progression and all of that. But on that game, we just played a ton of exhibition games. It was just such a big deal in our house. Another one would be NBA Jam for Sega CD. I know that sounds surprising, but it had an amazing soundtrack. Sega CD was so cool to us at the time. So even just popping NBA Jam in, that disc in, and, just seeing it boot up and everything on our 32-inch tube TV, which we thought was massive at the time. Yeah, back then. Well, it was heavy. It was massive in that way.
That's right.
But screen size compared to today wasn't. But yeah, just getting those players out on the floor and feeling like we're talking about how it looks so much like real life, all of that. Just so many fond memories with that game. So that's just some. I obviously have more that I'll talk about in a minute, but what else do you got?
Well, just to recap the games that I mentioned, NBA Jam Tournament Edition was my introduction to NBA Jam. I actually played that sequel before the original, so that's why it remains my favourite and most nostalgic game in the series, apart from On Fire Edition, of course. Just playing through that, really getting hooked on the Jam style, and playing through the tournament, unlocking the expanded rosters, not realising that I was going to unlock the expanded rosters. Now, if I'd read the back of the box properly, I would have known that was what happened. But seeing that expanded roster and finding the secret players showing up for the first time after you've finished the tournament, just being blown away by that and realizing that there was something cool and a reason to keep playing after defeating all 27 teams was just so awesome. Live 95 Super Nintendo, really my introduction to sim basketball gaming, and just playing through the season and enjoying that so much, and making a few trades here and there, and bringing Cedric Ceballos to the Bulls, so I had a 23 on the Bulls, like things like that. And Live 96 PC, the first PC Live that I owned, and I still have my original copy today that I bought back in 1996. And just the feeling of seeing that ticket dispensed for the first time in the menus, and just getting into gameplay and playing that first game and realizing how much fun I was going to have with it. Live 2004, obviously, that after 2003 I wasn't totally happy with at the time because of the tone, the courtside comedy, as I've talked about before, although I do have a certain nostalgia and fondness for it today. And similar with Live 06, really, I mean, I did really enjoy 2005, but 06 again felt like another step forward. I did like Freestyle Superstars at the time. I still think it was a worthy idea, even though they did need to move away from it ultimately. 2K13, because that's the game that got me into the 2K series. Just the right stick dribbling, as I've said before, getting hooked on my career, just really getting into 2K, finally getting into 2K, and falling in love with that series. But I think Live 2000 might stand out to me because it was such a huge jump from what I was playing at the time. It was a way to celebrate our new family PC, one that could finally run the latest PC version of Live, seeing all the legends there officially in the game, getting into franchise mode, something I dreamed about, the multi-season play. Yeah, I think Live 2000 is one of the games that impressed me the most upon firing it up and finally getting to play it. So that might be the game that of those, I mean, they're all games I'd love to be able to play again for the first time. But Live 2000, I think, is the one, Derek, if I had to pick just one, that would be the one to play again for the first time, just be wowed again by all of that stuff.
So NBA Live 2000 was actually the next one I was going to bring up. Big surprise, right? I've talked about it before on a past episode, but my brothers and I huddled up in front of a 19-inch monitor. And this was when I got back into PC gaming. So I was like into it for NBA Live 98. Then we took a couple of years off, and then NBA Live 2000, we were back into it. So all three of us are huddled up in front of this 19-inch monitor, and we're booting up NBA Live 2000 for the first time. And we were floored. Just the unbelievable presentation. You know how I am about the Legends. All three of us were like that about the Legends back then, seeing all the Legends in the season, seeing the depth that was in that game, being able to take our teams on the floor via fantasy draft. And, my brother Mark, stacking his team with tall players, like having Mirasan and Sean Bradley on the same team, and me always drafting Jason Williams. And when we experienced that, like the first time we booted up NBA Live 2000, we were going through it and we were putting players on the floor and everything. We just thought it was the best, like the best it could get, right? It was just great gameplay, great graphics, great cyber faces, great presentation, and great options. So, I would, experiencing NBA Live 2000 for the first time again, and, even if it is us like cramped, huddled up in front of a monitor on uncomfortable stools, that would be excellent. Another one I want to bring up really quick because it came out around the same time, the original NBA 2K. So that's when, stuff got real when it comes to graphics. I think that the graphics are better, obviously, in NBA 2K than they are in NBA Live 2000 overall, as far as like the textures and everything, and just the way the courts and arenas look and whatnot, the way the hoops look, all of that stuff. Because the Dreamcast, was better graphics. Like it did have better graphics than the PlayStation 1. So I was so floored with the graphics on NBA 2K when I first booted it up that I was like, listen, I need to make highlight reels on this game. So we had a setup where we had like our Dreamcast like hooked up to the VCR in order to be able to record highlights. So you know how I do highlight reels now? I do the top 10 plays of the week. I do highlight reels for the NLSC YouTube. Well, back then it was me huddled up in front of my TV with my Dreamcast and VCR, finding a way to record highlights and make highlight reels. That's how blown away I was with the original NBA 2K. And when we first saw that on the virtual hardwood, when we first booted up NBA 2K, we thought that it was basically as real as it could get. We just couldn't even believe how good it looked. And like the 2K replays where it went up close and you could see it say Spalding on the basketball. Are you kidding me? And it's like the ball's rotating through the air and then it swishes through the net and the players' faces are animated while they're doing different things and whatnot. We were just like, it just can't get better than this. So I wouldn't mind going back and visiting the original NBA 2K for the first time either.
And something that might be difficult to really appreciate today, because year to year we're not seeing the same jump in graphics because they've already come a very long way with the current hardware that we're working with, be it PC or the current generation of consoles, the new generation of consoles. But there was a while there in the late 90s, early 2000s, where it felt like there was some kind of graphical improvement year after year. You look at NBA Live 98, 99, 2000, you can see some pretty big jumps, Derek, from just in the space of 3 years.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think that was the fun part back then, too, was just seeing the progression.
Yeah.
Right. And seeing all these different companies get in on it and continue to make games that were part of their series, whether it be Shootout, then Inside Drive later, the In the Zone series. Everybody was trying to get better, right? And that was part of the fun back then, and it was the part of the fun of picking up different titles. Another one that I wanted to mention, too, from around that time, Andrew, NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC. When I first put that game on the Dreamcast, the NBC presentation just spoke to me. right? It has that full NBA on NBC presentation with the music, the intro that they had in real life. Everything just spoke to me with that game. And I just remember being floored the first time I put it on. And then I'm like, okay, these players are really jacked, but that looks like Hakeem Olajuwon, right? That looks like Charles Barkley. That looks like this player. That looks like that player. Like the faces in that game are excellent. The action is fast paced and fun. Like that game blew me away the first time that I put it on. And another one before I forget, Tecmo Super NBA Basketball. The intro to that game was fantastic. It went through all the NBA teams during the intro. You went in and you went into the player profiles and you saw like that digitized picture, real picture of each player. You get out onto the court and it was the fast-paced action that you were really hoping that basketball games were going to have, at that point. Tecmo Super NBA Basketball, with its depth, with its stat tracking, all of that stuff, we were blown away by it. And that our introduction to that game was fantastic because you put it on, you see all the NBA teams, you go into the player profiles for the first time, and then you go on the virtual hardwood and the game is fun and everything. That's a memorable one for me.
I'm glad you brought up intros because obviously gameplay is paramount. The time we sunk into modes is important as well, and that's a big part of the experience, obviously. But firing up the game for the first time, seeing a really cool intro, those old intros we used to have that were real highlight clips, both Live and 2K did them, Inside Drive did them, a lot of games did them over the years. It was kind of the done thing before we had the in-game assets, the ones that were done in-engine. Of course, now we don't have them at all, which is kind of a shame. And I know we often end up skipping them, but it's still nice to have them. And that first time you fired up a game, watching that intro for the first time, I brought up the ticket dispensing in the menu in Live 96. Before I even got there was that intro, the video intro, which really fired me up to play that for the first time. And then seeing that, and this is your ticket to great gameplay, if you will. So that kind of stuff really does fire you up to play as well. So that having a great intro and hearing the NBA on NBC music, things like that, and just a really great soundtrack before you've even hit the game, just whatever gets you fired up to play some virtual basketball. Yeah, that's all part of the experience. Just that experiencing that whole package for the first time, the intro, the menus, the music, and then getting into the gameplay and enjoying it so much. The games that I mentioned, those are the ones that I'd love to be able to play for the first time. But with that being said, I do love dusting them off. I mean, whenever I dust them off, I get that nostalgic rush, and I do remember playing them for the first time, and I'm able to create new memories as well, and that's awesome. But yeah, if I could go back in time and experience them again for the first time, that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I miss the intros in the game. They don't have them anymore. They haven't had them since NBA 2K17. So 2K18, they stopped doing intros, and 2K23, they still don't have them. So I do think that's missing, and it's something that we used to look forward to. Remember the cool NBA 2K16 intro?
Oh, yeah.
Where your player is, it's really well animated, and it's supposedly, you're my player trying to, battle the cover players and whatnot. You're going one-on-one with James Harden and Anthony Davis and everything, and then the final boss is Michael Jordan and all of that. Like, what a cool intro. We loved that when we first saw it. And as you know, the NBA 2K17 intro was excellent, and it got us pumped to play that game, and it was really cool to see that for the first time. Even if they just had an option in these games where in the options menu you could shut it off, right? So like after you saw it for the first time, you could go into the options menu, be like, I don't want to see this anymore, and shut off the game's introduction or whatever. So I'm just going to bring up a few more really quick, and we can get to the community's responses. NBA Live 2003, that was a really big deal. Because it brought in right stick dribbling. It brought in a whole new gameplay style. The presentation rocked. Everything about NBA Live 2003, when we first put it on, we loved it. Obviously, we ended up discovering more gameplay issues later, and the bumper car mechanics and the wildly fast-paced action ended up getting to us a little bit later. But we spent a ton of time on NBA Live 2003, and that initial impression of Live 2003 was like, wow, this is amazing. love this game. Then I'd say NBA 2K11. I'd like to experience that for the first time again, because not only was it the amazing, the Jordan Challenge, it was that great, ridiculous Jordan intro, which is one of the best, if not the best, in video game history. Almost gives you goosebumps when you watch that. It's so good. But I feel like I didn't appreciate it as much when it first came out. And I wonder, because I had a lot going on in life at that time. I feel like if I visited that for the first time today and I had never seen it before, I think I would appreciate it even more now than I did when it first came out. I would love to get another crack at visiting that for the first time. Because like you stated on a prior podcast, sometimes things in life impact, how you feel about games or how you experience games.
Sure.
And whatnot. And it can make it so something that you would normally enjoy or be super into, make it so you're not as into it because you have 100 other things on your mind. And during that time, it was kind of a tough time in my life as far as just like a lot of moving parts, a lot of things going on. So NBA 2K11, I'd love to, get another chance at having a first crack at it. NBA 2K17, we've been playing it now for almost, for over 6 years straight, still part of our regular rotation. I would not mind visiting that for the first time again. My impression of NBA 2K17 when I first put it on, I texted my brother while he was at work and I said, they fixed everything. This game is unbelievable. And I had only played a half of basketball on it at that point. The gameplay just floored me. I loved the way that the game looked, all of that. And then obviously we just sunk thousands and thousands and thousands of hours into that game. And then I guess the other one might be NBA 2K13. 2K13 was the right stick dribbling introduction in the NBA 2K series. And when we first put that game on the floor and we were using the right stick, we couldn't believe how well their first implementation of that was. And I think you agreed.
Yeah.
It worked so well. You were able to do stuff you've never been able to do before in the NBA 2K series. So they were doing a lot of other things right before, but they were really missing that right stick dribbling and right stick triple threat. Well, they got it. And our first impression of that game was unbelievable. Like, it's so positive.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's why it's on my list as well. 2K11, I would also like to experience again for the first time. I think I'd have a better impression of it this time around, which sounds weird considering so many people consider it the best game in the series. Some people still say that to this day, but at the time, still adjusting to the isomotion, of course. I think if I was able to play that again for the first time with the appreciation I have now for what 2K was doing at the time and the open-mindedness to really adjust to that style of gameplay and that style of dribbling controls. Although I do still think that the right stick dribbling was the right way to go in the long run, absolutely. So different to your situation where kind of external factors were really perhaps taking away from the enjoyment of the game, but just having that more open-mindedness about what 2K was doing. I was moving in that direction for sure, but if I was a couple of years later, I'd be really more on board with the 2K way of doing things. So yeah, if I could get a better first impression of 2K11, kind of a different for me, but I certainly wouldn't mind being able to go back and play that for the first time too.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably do a whole nother show on, games that we would like a better first impression on.
Yeah.
Where we revisited a game later on and maybe we were like, hey, actually like you would 2K14. Right?
I was going to say, I mean,
that's the golden standard example.
For me,
actually,
yeah.
NBA 2K14 for Xbox One and the PS4, you have been obsessed with it, but back in the day, you were just like, yeah, I don't really want to play this.
Well, I guess that's why I didn't want to. I originally thought about putting it on this list, but then I thought, well, I kind of had that. I kind of did go back in time, in a way, and have that proper first impression of it by giving it a second chance or a second look. Really gave me what I might have preferred to have the first time around. So I did leave it off this list for that reason. But it absolutely is an example, as you say, the golden example for me, going back to a game and really enjoying it on a second look.
Yeah, and I've definitely had games like that in the past. Actually, NBA 2K19 is one of them, where, I mean, roster mods helped, obviously. But my first impression of that game was not positive based on all of the skating and the suction in it. And I actually made a YouTube video talking about the skating and sliding and the suction issues, etc. But, you know, after, you know, all my slider tweaks using the roster mods and all of that stuff, the retro season roster mods from Stildo and team, when I went back and visited it with those tweaks and those mods, the game just opened up, right? And it was a lot more fun. So I guess you could say, second impression of that game with all of those tweaks was 10 times better.
So yeah, a lot of games that we would go back and play for the first time to get that those awesome first impressions and that excitement of seeing the intro and getting on the virtual hardwood for the first time and seeing what they're all about. But obviously we threw the question out to the community, so let's get to those community responses. First up we have Chuck LA92, of course frequent contributor to the top 10 as well. Shout out to you as always. Says NBA Jam Arcade 1993. Of course the 30th anniversary of NBA Jam this year, Derek. Yeah, absolutely a great choice to be able to play that for the first time and yeah, just experience the explosion of arcade basketball.
Yeah, shout out to you, Chuck LA92. I can always count on you for submitting a great Lakers highlight for the top 10 plays of the week. In fact, your one from NBA 2K15 using Kobe Bryant, the one that was in this week's countdown, is one of my favorites because of the sweet dribble move that took place before that loud one-handed jam. Yeah, NBA Jam, like I said, the Sega CD version was really popular in my house. We were also obsessed with NBA Jam Tournament Edition because it gave us more players to use. We're very fond of that Celtics team in that game with Dino Radja, Dominique Wilkins, and D. Brown. Yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with NBA Jam no matter what.
And we have another vote for NBA Jam here from Retrobit Coach. Says NBA Jam, the amazement of seeing stars from the 90s with visual details making them easily recognizable. Zipping all over the court with those crazy moves, and the chance to hear that play-by-play, he's on fire, would be a great surprise. And yeah, just everything about NBA Jam just, I think, blew us away back in the day and just really fired us up to play. And of course, as we've said before, Tim Kitzrow's commentary was such a huge part of that.
Yeah, well, it all came together, right? It screamed NBA action. It was the gameplay that I think a lot of basketball fans were yearning for. Like, we were, at the time going through kind of the sluggish, NBA Showdown. And no offense, because I did like NBA Showdown, right? But we were going through some of the sluggish 5-on-5 games like NBA Showdown. And then, before that, Bulls versus Blazers. There wasn't really any super fun, fast-paced, exciting basketball games really out. And then NBA Jam shows up. And it's like this new experience that basketball gamers really, really wanted to sink their teeth into, and something that they were really hoping for. So NBA Jam is so legendary because of, not only because of its roots, because of, the first games that were so successful, but because, they made multiple games in the 90s that were absolutely excellent. And they continued the greatness with games like NBA Jam on Fire Edition.
I think that was so important to speed up the game. And we even saw that with NBA Live 95, right? When they finally added a sprint control and made it a bit quicker and opened it up. And you weren't getting stuck to opposing players as easily. But NBA Jam really led the charge of having that fast-paced action. And even though it was obviously over the top and defined that arcade style, I mean, there's a reason that it's popular with hardcore basketball gamers and hardcore basketball fans and more casual basketball gamers and fans alike.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. Talked about the 90s, it's the Attitude Era. It's the era of fast-paced fun and excitement and bruising action. And you look at a game like NBA Jam, and it had it all. It fit that 90s style and fit what people wanted in that decade. You shove people instead of going for steals, right? You're skying 10, 20, 30 feet above the basket and throwing it down hard and all of that stuff. It brought the physicality and the fast-paced fun to the virtual hardwood and video games in general. It did such a great job of that.
And next up we have Steve from the Dot, the Live King, of course, says arch rivals, so the precursor to NBA Jam.
So it's one of the most annoying basketball video games ever made just because of the cutscenes after every single basket.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible. I don't know why they did that, but it really hurts the action. However, from a gameplay perspective, it's fun. It is pretty fast paced. Not as fast as NBA Jam, but yeah, it's pretty fast paced. And, your entire goal is to punch your opponent in the face and hit a shot or throw it down on the other end. I think that I didn't own that game back in the day. I ended up getting it later on in life. But I would say that I would have had a lot of fun with it back at the time, but I'm not sure how much replayability there was there. So I'm not sure how much time I would have spent on that as a kid.
I think the value is definitely in the, as far as replay value, I think it's definitely in going head-to-head with different friends, I think, and challenging them.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, house parties, basically, right?
Pretty
or
much,
like
yeah.
With your brothers, or et cetera. And you know what? That can be fun, and we did have fun with video games a lot that way back then. But I'm wondering if I would have even chosen that over like the other basketball games.
Yeah, I think it's
I had at the time.
Maybe more of an occasional one for me. I actually have it on PC via the Midway Arcade Treasures collection, an emulated version of their arcade releases, which includes it. I also have it on NES. The NES version, as you might expect, is definitely not up to scratch with the arcade, but it's actually a decent port for the 8-bit system.
Well, that's when I played it when I was a kid. I didn't own it when it was new. We rented Arch Rivals.
That's what we used to do.
Right, exactly. So I believe we had it for like 6 or 7 days, played it, returned it, and I think we might have rented it one more time. I think we rented it twice. But yeah, that was my experience with that game as a kid, and then I played it a little bit more later. But I would say that the thing that hurts that game the most is just those damn cutscenes after every single
absolutely,
basket.
Yeah. Overkill, for sure. But next up we have Hey Yo Court, says NBA 2K on Dreamcast. Can't explain that feeling. And you can definitely relate to that one. I didn't have a Dreamcast, didn't play 2K until you connected with me on Parsec to show me, but I definitely get it.
Can I just talk about the Dreamcast for a second? My God, what an amazing console. I'd say, ahead of its time. I think that the controls on the Dreamcast were excellent as well. I always thought it was cool that there was an option for like the football game for NFL 2K where you had like an insert on your gamepad where you could like run a play and your opponent couldn't see it. You know what I mean? Like it's not on the screen, but it's actually on your gamepad. Like that is super cool. I think my friend Will and I did that when we were playing, I want to say NFL 2K1. The Dreamcast graphics, like it wasn't pixelated. It was just super smooth textures on the players on NBA 2K, on NFL 2K, on NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC, on Virtua Tennis. Like just the textures were so smooth. The gameplay was so good on so many games like Ready to Rumble and everything. I absolutely think that the Dreamcast is one of the best video game systems of all time. And when we first booted up that original NBA 2K, like I had talked about, earlier in the show, just absolutely floored by all of it. We were like, that is Allen Iverson. That is Chris Webber. That is Jason Williams. We can't believe how much these look like their real life counterparts. We can't believe how smooth the textures are. That hoop looks realistic. It feels so good to hit a shot. We were blown away by it. So I definitely agree with the original 2K.
Next up we have Phil Lime 2002, says NBA 2K15. My career was perfect, soundtrack was heavenly, and this game would make me feel 8 years younger. 2K15 I've developed more of an appreciation for in hindsight. I think I was still having a bit of a hangover of the grumbling about 2K14 at the time, and also trying to give Live 15 a go as well. I think that was my big issue at the time, Derek, was trying to juggle those two games. But 2K15 is a spectacular release. My career is that's an interesting My Career. I still haven't covered it for Way Back Wednesday. I do want to, because that's the one that's very, very interesting, Derek, because you start out halfway through the year latching on with a 10-day contract rather than getting drafted. So they took a really different approach to the My Career story that year. We joked a lot on the podcast back in the day about the unlikability of the My Career protagonist that year, Derek, but I do want to give it more of a chance because it is a very interesting idea, and 2K15 on the sticks. Fantastic. But another one that it has an introduction, Derek, but it actually goes away after the first time you've watched it.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely an interesting thing about 2K15. My impressions with 2K15 were positive and negative. As weird as that sounds, I had a positive reaction to the gameplay immediately. I was like, I'm going to spend time on this game, and I did end up spending quite a bit of time on that game on my team. It was my favorite my team was in that game. I thought that they did make some improvements to the ball handling. They added size ups in NBA 2K15, which weren't there in NBA 2K14, which was really cool because then you got some more authenticity into the game, and the gameplay really flowed well. That was the positive first impression to the game. The negative was how the visuals. So on NBA 2K14, we were floored by the bright arenas, right? The reflections, the way the jerseys moved, all of that stuff. When I first got NBA 2K15 on the floor, the graphics just bummed me out in comparison, because now all the arenas are suddenly dark. The reflections aren't showing as much. There's not as much jersey movement. I felt like they really went downhill in the immersion department as far as, the presentation and whatnot. And I think that it affected the way I felt about putting on the game and the gameplay in general. And I think that's because I was spoiled, as are you, doing my career with those amazing visuals from 2K14. So in my opinion, it was graphics step back, gameplay a step in the positive direction. Like I said, I did end up spending a lot of time with NBA 2K15 on my team, and I think that it is an excellent game in the series.
Next up, we have Just Dewitt 10 says NBA Live 08. Christmas Day, you run Cavs versus Lakers, and the first thing you hear is this, Chef's Kiss, and posts a link to DJ Jazzy Jeff featuring CL Smooth, All I Know, from that soundtrack. And I really do like that song from the Live 08 soundtrack. Live 08 is probably not my favorite game in the series. In fact, it definitely isn't on PC or Xbox 360. But it does have its moments, Derek, and I do actually really like the soundtrack.
I'm guessing he's talking about the Xbox 360 version. I'm not 100% sure. I will say that I warmed up to the 360 version later on in life, the PS3 360 version. And the reason is because it was a marked improvement over NBA Live 07 for the 360, and in a big way. They smoothed out the frame rate. The game was now in 60 FPS. They smoothed out the dribbling, the shooting. They basically smoothed out the animations in general. I'm sure there's still some rocket dunks and there's still some odd on-court happenings, but it's probably 1% of what happens in NBA Live 07 for the 360. I do have a more of an appreciation for NBA Live 08 today than I did when it was first released.
I actually fired up Live 08 on 360 the other day as a part of Writing a Wayback Wednesday. It will be coming out at some point in the future, but I wasn't recording, Derek, and I know, you rightfully can get on my case about this, forgetting to hook up my Elgato and record, because I actually had a 360 layup with Tim Duncan, which I would have submitted for the top 10 if I'd known.
I might not have put it in there, because why is Tim Duncan doing a 360 layup?
True.
Although I have put in a Rick Fox windmill, I think, in the top 10 before catching, on a caught alley-oop. So Rick Fox wasn't exactly windmilling it. So
not exactly.
Yeah, it might
not really, no. So sometimes you just got to run with it. Absolutely. And finally, we also have a response over on the Discord. As always, if you'd like to join the NLSC Discord, we'd love to have you. Just go to the NLSC, nb-live.com, or our forum, and you'll find a link there. And Dreamcast Boy 99 says 2K16, Live 2000, Live 2004, maybe even 2K11 or 2K12. And I definitely get those picks.
No, absolutely. I think that 2K11 and 2K12 would, if I had never played them before and I was booting them up in 2023 for the first time, and not even going back then, when it was new, booting them up now, I would be floored by them, and I'd want to spend a ton of time on them. So that's how you know how well those games were made and how well they hold up today. NBA 2K16 gave me an absolutely terrible first impression because, and I don't know if it was just the PC version, but there was, when we first installed it, players were shooting, looking away from the basket. They would take a jump shot and their head was turned the opposite way. The gameplay was super sluggish and super crappy to be completely honest. And I remember back in the day doing an NLSC forum post saying, listen, we got to address this. This game at launch feels and looks absolutely terrible on the court. And then I believe they did like a patch within the first week or two. And then the game ended up being pretty damn fun. And we ended up spending, thousands of hours on this game, and including finishing a full my league where my two brothers and I all controlled our own team and were our opponents for every game, and played all 82 games and the playoffs, 12-minute quarters, etc. So NBA 2K16 ended up being really fun and good, but at launch I was not impressed with it.
It's funny how that goes. I mean, obviously 2K14 is, once again, my go-to example for games I've had a change of heart about. Obviously, we've been talking about games where we love to go back and have that first impression again and experience that excitement for the first time all over again. But yeah, there's a lot of games we've had poor first impressions of, but they haven't lasted, and that's been good because the games have turned out to be all-time favorites.
Yeah, exactly. And like we said, 2K14 is a great example. For you, NBA 2K19, when I went back and revisited it, with the mods and the slider tweaks and everything, that's now become part of my regular rotation and whatnot. So yeah, it's always good to revisit a game with a fresh set of eyes, and maybe your mind is in a different place at that time, and you're able to accept some of the flaws a little better that are in that game, and you're able to appreciate things about it more. And there's definitely a lot of titles like that.
Definitely. And one last comment here from Dreamcast Boy 99 says, I was one of those schmucks with a Wii stuck playing Live 08. And yeah, I've got a feeling that the Wii version might have been the weakest one.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I had a Wii, but I hardly ever played it. I think the only game that I played on my Nintendo Wii was Mario Kart, and I played it maybe once, and my girlfriend kicked my butt on it, and I never played the Wii again, I don't think. And then what I did after she kicked my butt on that version of it, I put on the Super Nintendo, and I absolutely destroyed her on the Super Nintendo version of Super Mario Kart. So I just wanted to make it known that, she may beat me on the Wii version, but she'll never beat me on the Super Nintendo version.
The definitive Mario Kart.
Yeah. So I will always say the best version of Mario Kart is the Super Nintendo version. And I will challenge anybody who listens to the podcast to race me when I'm using Toad, especially on Ghost Valley.
But thank you to everybody who responded to the prompt this week. Always love that interaction with our listeners. And really cool, Derek, to hear about the games that our listeners also wish they could play for the first time and share them with us.
So many fond memories, right? Putting on games for the first time, watching that introduction, going into the menus, looking at the depth, getting excited about the depth, throwing the teams on for, on the floor for the first time. Usually it was the Celtics for me when I was visiting a game for the first time, either that or like the Kings in the early 2000s and whatnot. And then just, experimenting with the game. That's just like one of the most fun parts. It's, with NBA Live, it's going into the triple threat and, executing spin moves and doing crossovers and doing quick first steps and all of that stuff, and looking at the different dunk animations and discovering the new animations that they put in the game and seeing them for the first time. The first time you pull off a reverse dunk in a game where you drive baseline and it's a dunk you've never seen before in that series of video games, you're like, oh my God, this is ridiculous and amazing, and I can't wait to do that again. You hit a shot for the first time and you're like, hey, the shooting feels pretty good, etc. You get one of those loud blocks in like NBA Live 2004 where you just meet somebody at the rim, like when I met you at the rim with Alonzo Mourning when we had that 95-96 roster mod session, and I just shoved it back in your face like that. I hate to bring that up, and sorry to say it that way.
I mean, it was an awesome moment. I can't hate.
It was a pretty good block. But it's stuff like that when you're experiencing it for the first time that just like you're just floored by it and it blows you away. And like the same thing with like a game like NBA 2K15. Like I said, they added size ups, and the first time you go into your size up with somebody like, I don't know, like Kevin Durant, and he's doing the real dribbling that he does in real life, and then you explode off of that animation and you throw it down, or you step back off of it and hit a three. It's like, this is so cool. We've never seen this before. So yeah, those first experiences are almost unmatched.
It really is special, for sure. And it is unfortunate that we can't go back in time and experience them for the first time again, but with retro gaming, we can go back and enjoy those old favorites to this day and create new memories, and we're always going to do that, Derek.
Yeah, we do it often.
And it's not going to end anytime soon. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, we thank you for tuning in and invite you to join us again next week, either on the NLSC, anew-live.com, our YouTube channel, or your podcast app of choice. In the meantime, please connect with us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
You can reach me on Twitter at D4Free84 and at D4Free-G. I am also on the NLSC, D4Free, and on YouTube, D4Free.
I am Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. The NLSC is on Twitter and Facebook at the NLSC. Our Instagram is NLSC Basketball. We're on YouTube at youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, nba-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.